What would you do if someone mocked your hero? The question hangs in the autumn air, like the paper airplane Danny Chen holds, fingers trembling. Not from the October cold seeping through Lincoln Middle School's cracked windows, but from something. Deeper. Danny's world is small and safe. Math class at 9:15, lunch with his sketchpad at 12:30. Drawing fighter jets in the margins, F-4 Phantoms, mostly because Grandpa flew them. The other kids don't understand why Danny chooses the library over the playground, why his backpack bulges with aviation magazines, why he traces the same stories over and over. Tales, his grandfather whispered before the silence came. Mrs. Peterson's classroom smells like old coffee and broken dreams. Her voice cuts through Danny's daydream, sharp as jet exhaust. "Danny," she says, eyes narrow behind thick glasses, "tell us about your family tree project." Danny's throat constricts. The poster. Board feels heavy in his hands. Carefully drawn branches, photos taped with the precision of a bombardier, and there, center branch, proud and faded, Lieutenant Colonel James Chen, United States, Air Force, Vietnam, 1968-1970. He flew F-4 Phantoms. Danny begins, voice barely above a whisper. Two Purple Hearts distinguished flying cross, shot down over, misses. Peterson's laugh stops him cold. "Not warm, not kind, sharp as broken glass. Fighter pilot," she says. "Really, Danny?" The room goes quiet, that terrible quiet that comes before storms. 28. Pairs of eyes turn toward him, some curious, some cruel. "Your grandfather was probably just maintenance crew, maybe cleaned the planes, but fighter pilot." Her voice carries the weight of dismissed dreams, the authority of someone who's never looked up, never wondered what it takes to chase thunder across enemy skies. Danny's hands shake. The poster board crumples slightly. Photos of his grandfather, young and proud in flight gear, suddenly feel like lies, even though they're not. Mrs. Peterson continues, her voice gaining momentum like a bomber on approach. "We need to be realistic about these family stories. Sometimes they get exaggerated over time. The word exaggerated lands like shrapnel cuts, deep, draws blood that only Danny can see. What would you do? Danny wants to speak, wants to tell them about the medals in the shoebox, about the flight log, with shaking handwriting, about the nightmares that still visit even 40 years later. But his voice has abandoned him, fled like his grandfather's squadron that day over the jungle when only 3 of 5 came home. And in the silence, something breaks. Not just Danny's heart, but something deeper. The sacred space where heroes live, where grandfathers become legends, where love meets memory and creates truth. Mrs. Peterson moves on to the next project, the next student, leaving Danny floating like debris after impact, scattered and falling. The bell rings. Students shuffle out backpacks and whispers, but Danny remains staring at the poster, at his grandfather's young face, at the life Mrs. Peterson just declared. Fake. Outside, October, wind rattles windows like distant gunfire, and somewhere in a memory, Danny can barely touch. An F-4 Phantom climbs toward heaven, carrying more than bombs, carrying the weight of what it means to be believed. The hallway swallows Danny, whole footsteps echoing off lockers like empty shell casings, hitting hangar floors. Word spreads fast in middle school, faster than F-4s at Mach 2. By lunch period, everyone knows Danny Chen's grandfather, the fake fighter pilot. The cafeteria becomes a combat zone. Danny navigates between tables, carrying his brown bag lunch and the weight of their stares. Jake Morrison slides into the seat across from him, uninvited, unwelcome, grinning like a shark sensing blood. So Jake says loudly, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "What other war stories did your grandpa make up? Did he fight dragons too? Maybe save the world from aliens?" Laughter ripples outward, spreading like napalm, burning everything in its path. Danny's sandwich turns to cardboard in his mouth. He tries to swallow, tries to disappear, but Jake isn't finished, my dad says. Jake continues, voice carrying across the lunchroom. Some people just make stuff up to feel important. You know what's sad? When kids, Believe obvious lies, more laughter sharper now, cutting deeper. Danny's vision blurs, not from tears though they threaten, but from something else, something that feels like his grandfather's final mission, going down in flames. That afternoon, Danny walks, home alone, autumn leaves crunching underfoot like the sound of distant artillery. His house sits at the end of Maple Street, small but neat American flag, hanging limp in the still air. Inside, the familiar smell of jasmine tea and his grandmother's. Cooking usually brings comfort, but today nothing can fill the hollow space Jake Morrison carved out with his cruel words. Grandma Lily looks up from her sewing eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, sensing something wrong, the way mothers and grandmothers. "Do you look troubled, little bird?" she says in her careful English, touched with the accent of someone who learned the language of her new country through love and necessity. Danny drops his backpack, slumps into the kitchen chair where his grandfather used to sit every morning reading the paper, sipping black coffee. "They say Grandpa wasn't really a pilot," Danny whispers, afraid to give the words full voice. Grandma Lily's hands still needle suspended between fabric and truth. "Who says this?" she asks. Voice quiet as temple bells, Danny tells her everything: Mrs. Peterson's dismissal, Jake's cruel laughter, the way the other kids looked at him like he was carrying some contagious disease called delusion. Grandma Lily sets down her sewing, rises from her chair with the dignity of someone who has survived too much history. She walks to the hallway closet, the one that always stays locked, the one Danny was never allowed to explore. Her fingers find the key hidden behind the picture frame, holding their wedding photo, young and hopeful, before the war changed everything. The closet door opens, revealing shadows and the smell of old leather mothballs and something else. Something that might be the ghost of aviation fuel. Grandma Lily reaches deep past winter coats, past boxes of Christmas decorations, past the detritus of decades. Her hands find what they seek, and she pulls out a flight helmet. Not just any helmet, but one worn smooth by countless missions, scarred by combat, stained with sweat and maybe tears. Danny's breath catches. The helmet seems to pulse with its own life, its own stories. Along the side, painted in fading white letters, Lataz, Kulje Chen, and below that, a small silhouette of an F-4 Phantom. Grandma Lily holds it out like an offering, like communion. "Your grandfather," she says softly, "never spoke of the war when he came home. Too much pain, too much loss. But this he kept." She places the helmet in Danny's trembling hands, and suddenly he can feel it. The weight of history, the presence of truth, the echo of jet engines screaming across enemy skies. The helmet is warm, despite years in darkness, warm with the memory of a young man who flew into hell and somehow found his way home. Danny looks up at his grandmother's face, lined with years and secrets and the kind of love that guards truth until the moment it's needed. "Most, tomorrow," she says, "you take this to school, show them what real looks like." Outside, the October wind picks up rattling windows, like the sound of distant propellers calling ghosts back to life. And in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of jasmine tea and his grandmother's fierce love, Danny holds his grandfather's helmet and feels for the first time since Mrs. Peterson's cruel words like he might be able to breathe again. The helmet whispers stories of courage, of sacrifice, of young men who flew into darkness so others could live in light. And Danny understands that some truths are too large for small minds to hold, but tomorrow he'll try to make them see what his grandfather really was, what he gave, what he carried, what he lost, and what he found. Tomorrow the helmet will speak for itself. Danny arrives at school early, flight helmet cradled against his chest like sacred cargo heavy with purpose. The morning hallway stretches empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting everything in harsh angles, institutional shadows. He places the helmet carefully on Mrs. Peterson's desk, next to her coffee-stained gradebook, and waits. Students trickle in backpacks, dragging voices rising until Jake Morrison spots it. "Whoa, Jake," announces voice cutting through morning chatter. Danny brought his costume helmet. The room pivots toward him, 28 pairs of eyes assessing, judging, preparing for sport misses. Peterson enters, arms full of papers, coffee in hand, scanning the room with practiced authority. Her gaze stops at the helmet. "What's this, Danny?" she asks, but her tone already suggests she knows and disapproves. "My grandfather's flight helmet," Danny says, standing straighter, finding courage and truth from Vietnam misses. Peterson sets down her coffee, picks up the helmet, turns it over in her hands like evidence in a trial. "She's already decided, Danny," she says, voice patient. "The way adults speak to children, they believe are lying. This looks like something from a costume. Shop military surplus, maybe. The paint is faded, the leather worn, but that doesn't mean your grandfather wore it." Jake Morrison snickers, the sound spreading like infection. "My uncle has one just like it," Jake says. "Got it at a flea market for $20. Sarah, Williams, usually quiet, usually kind, finds her voice. "My dad says you can buy anything online now. Fake medals, fake uniforms, even fake helmets." The words hit Danny like ground fire, unexpected, devastating misses. Peterson nods approvingly, as if Sarah has passed some important test. That's very observant, Sarah. Critical thinking is so important. She sets the helmet down, not gently, not with the reverence it deserves. "Danny, I think it's time we talked about the difference between family stories and documented history." The classroom becomes a tribunal and Danny the accused. "But what about the letters?" Danny asks desperately, voice breaking slightly. "The ones from his squadron, miss." Peterson's expression softens, not with kindness, but with the practiced sympathy of someone delivering bad news. "Oh, honey," she says, "and the condescension burns worse than cruelty. Sometimes families create elaborate stories. It's actually quite common, especially in immigrant families trying to establish American credentials." The words slam into Danny like shrapnel. Immigrant families. American credentials. As if his grandfather's service could be dismissed with sociology. Jake Morrison leans forward, sensing opportunity. "So Danny's whole family are just pretenders, Mrs." Peterson doesn't correct him, doesn't defend Danny, doesn't acknowledge the cruelty spreading through her classroom like poison gas. Instead, she launches into her prepared lesson about the importance of historical accuracy, of not believing family. Myths. Danny sits, frozen helmet before him, growing colder, more distant, as if Mrs. Peterson's words are stealing its power. During lunch, the attacks escalate. Jake Morrison orchestrates them like a conductor leading a symphony of humiliation. "Hey, Danny," Jake calls out across the cafeteria. "When are you going to admit your grandpa was fake?" Other voices join in, emboldened by the morning's events, by Mrs. Peterson's tacit approval. Did he fight in Star Wars too? Maybe he knew Top Gun. Was his plane invisible? Is that why nobody saw it? The laughter builds wave after wave until Danny feels like he's drowning in their mockery. He stands abruptly, lunch tray clattering, and runs, not walking, running toward the exit. Behind him, Jake Morrison's voice follows, loud enough for everyone to hear. "There goes the faker, running away just like his pretend grandpa probably did." More laughter, cruel and sharp, echoing. Off cafeteria walls, Danny pushes through doors into the courtyard, where Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor, is emptying trash bins. Mr. Rodriguez looks up, sees Danny's face, twisted with pain, and something passes between them. Recognition, understanding, the wordless communication of shared suffering. "You okay, mijo?" Mr. Rodriguez asks. Quietly, Danny wants to answer, wants to tell someone, anyone, about the helmet, about his grandfather's medals, about the truth everyone refuses to see. But words fail him again. He shakes his head, wipes his eyes, and walks back inside, leaving Mr. Rodriguez watching, understanding more than he says. The afternoon brings no relief. In history class, during a unit on the Vietnam War, Mrs. Peterson calls on Danny. "Danny, since you've been sharing family stories, perhaps you'd like to tell us about the realities of that conflict?" Her voice carries subtle mockery, invisible to most but clear to Danny. He sits silent, unable to speak, unable to defend the man who flew through hell and came home broken, but alive. Around him, classmates whisper, snicker, exchange glances that say everything about who they believe and who they don't. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from. The day crawls toward its end each minute, an eternity of whispered jokes, pointed looks, casual cruelties. Danny retrieves the helmet from Mrs. Peterson's desk, holds it close, feels its weight, its truth, its undeniable reality. But truth he's learning isn't always enough to overcome the comfortable lies people prefer to believe. Walking home, helmet tucked under his arm, Danny feels something shifting inside him, not breaking exactly, but changing, hardening like metal under pressure. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, more doubt, more mockery, more institutional blindness, but tonight he'll hold his grandfather's helmet and remember that. Some battles are worth fighting even when you're fighting them alone. The walk home stretches longer, each step heavier than the last. Autumn wind cutting through Danny's jacket like the cold stares that followed him all day. His grandmother's house appears through the gathering dusk, windows glowing warm, but even that familiar comfort feels distant now, unreachable. Danny pushes through the front door, helmet still clutched against his chest, and finds Grandma Lily in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming an old Chinese lullaby. She looks up, takes one glance at his face, and her hands still on the vegetables she's been chopping. Little bird. What happened? Danny collapses into the chair, his grandfather's chair, and tells her everything. Jake Morrison's escalating cruelty, Mrs. Peterson's public dismissal, the way the other kids looked at him like he carried some disease called delusion. They think I'm lying, he whispers, voice breaking on each word. They think we're all lying, Grandma. Lily sets down her knife, wipes her hands. On her apron, moves to stand behind Danny, her small hands resting on his shoulders. Some people, she says quietly, cannot see past their own small worlds. They mistake their blindness for wisdom. But Danny, barely 13, carrying weight. No child should. Bear shakes his head. What if they're right? What if I just want Grandpa to be a hero so badly that I made it all up? The question hangs in the air like smoke from a crashed plane, acrid and suffocating. Grandma Lily's hands tighten on his shoulders, not in anger, but in fierce protection, the way mothers defend cubs, the way love defends truth. You listen to me, little bird, she says, voice carrying authority earned through decades of surviving other people's cruelty. Your grandfather was many things. A quiet man, gentleman, broken man sometimes, but never a liar. She moves to the window, stares out at the darkening street where streetlights flicker on like distant flares. When he came home, she continues, voice soft as prayer. He didn't speak for months, just sat in that chair, staring at nothing, seeing things we couldn't see. I thought the war had stolen his voice forever, but slowly, very slowly, he began to tell me stories, not bragging stories, not hero stories, just truth. She turns back to Danny, eyes bright with unshed tears. He told me about the friends who didn't come home, about the missions that went wrong, about the weight of dropping bombs, knowing people lived below. Heroes aren't people who feel no fear. Little bird heroes are people who fly anyway. Danny wants to believe her, needs to believe her, but doubt has taken root like bamboo, growing fast, choking out everything else. That night, after dinner, after homework, after the house settles into familiar quiet, Danny lies awake. Through his bedroom wall, he can hear his grandmother moving around her room, opening drawers, closing them, searching for something. The sounds continue past midnight, past the time she usually sleeps, until finally silence returns. But Danny doesn't sleep, cannot. Sleep his mind, replaying every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment today, when truth felt like quicksand beneath his feet. He thinks about his grandfather, tries to imagine him young, climbing into the cockpit of an F-4 Phantom, heart pounding, hands steady, knowing he might not come home. Did Grandpa ever doubt himself? Ever wonder if he belonged in that pilot's seat? Ever feel like everyone was waiting for him to fail? The helmet sits on Danny's dresser in the moonlight, silent keeping. Its secrets. By morning, Danny has made a decision. He won't bring the helmet to school anymore, won't subject it to their mockery, won't give them more ammunition for their cruelty. He'll keep his grandfather's truth locked away, safe from their disbelief, even if it means carrying the burden alone. Grandma Lily watches him over breakfast, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she didn't sleep, either as if she spent the night wrestling with her own difficult decisions. She says nothing about the helmet staying home, but Danny sees her glance toward the dresser where it sits like a monument to abandoned hope. At school, the attacks continue, but with less venom now that Danny shows no fight. No resistance, no defiance. Jake Morrison seems almost disappointed by the easy victory the complete surrender misses. Peterson moves on to other topics, other victims satisfied that she's taught her students an important lesson about distinguishing fact from fiction. But in the hallway between classes, Danny catches sight of Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor, watching him, with dark eyes that seem to hold their own secrets, their own pain. For just a moment their gazes meet, and Danny sees something he hasn't seen in days. Recognition, belief, understanding. Mr. Rodriguez nods slightly, almost imperceptibly, and continues pushing his cleaning cart down the hallway. But something passes between them in that brief moment. Something that feels like hope. Danny doesn't know yet that Mr. Rodriguez served 3 tours. In Vietnam, doesn't know about the Purple Heart hidden in his toolbox, doesn't know about the letters he's been writing for the past 2 days. Letters to people who might listen, people who might care, people who understand the difference between respect and mockery, between truth and lies, between what children deserve and what they're getting. Danny doesn't know that change is coming, that justice sometimes arrives unexpected, wearing work clothes and speaking softly. All Danny knows is that, for the first time in 3 days, someone looked at him and didn't see a liar or a fool or a disappointment. Someone saw a boy who needed defending, and sometimes that's enough to keep hope alive just a little longer. Mr. Rodriguez pushes his cart through Lincoln Middle School's empty hallways. Fluorescent lights humming overhead like distant helicopters, a sound that never quite leaves his dreams. It's after hours building settled into silence when secrets emerge. From shadows, he's been thinking about Danny Chen for 3 days straight, about the pain in that boy's eyes, the way he carried his grandfather's helmet, like it weighed more than a 13-year-old should ever have, to bear. Miguel Rodriguez knows that weight carried it himself for 47 years, since the day he stepped off the transport plane at Travis Air Force Base and tried to forget everything he'd seen, but some things refused to stay buried. He stops outside the main office keys, jingling softly the way dog tags used to against his chest, back when he wore them with pride, before the world decided Vietnam veterans were either baby killers or broken toys. The office door swings open, his master key granting access to the school's administrative heart, where decisions get made about children's futures. Mr. Rodriguez has worked here 15 years, invisible to most, just the quiet man who empties trash mops, floors, fixes what's broken. But tonight he's looking for something specific. The student files are locked, but Mr. Rodriguez knows where the secretary keeps the emergency key taped under her desk drawer for when the principal needs weekend access. Danny Chen's file, thin but telling, emergency contact forms, report cards, and there, what he's looking for. Family information listing Lily Chen as guardian. Former address in San Francisco, and in the notes section, barely legible handwriting. Student lives with grandmother following grandfather's death. James Chen, military veteran. Miguel's hands tremble slightly as he photographs the page with his phone, careful not to disturb anything else. But it's not enough, not nearly enough to convince people like Mrs. Peterson, who mistake cynicism for intelligence. He needs more. The next morning, Miguel arrives at work earlier than usual, with purpose burning in his chest. During his lunch break, he drives to the public library where computers are free and databases are accessible to anyone willing to look hard enough. The National Archives website loads slowly on the old terminal, but Miguel has patience learned in rice paddies, where waiting meant living and rushing meant dying. He searches James Chen, Vietnam. War Air Force F-4 Phantom. The results populate like ghosts materializing, and there on the screen, undeniable, as sunrise is the truth. Lieutenant Colonel James Chen, 404th Tactical Fighter Wing, Udon Royal Thai Air Force Base, 1968-1970 combat missions. Abundant 47 awards. Distinguished Flying Cross. 2 Purple Hearts Air Medal with oak leaf clusters. Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, shot down October 15, 1969. Over North Vietnam, rescued after 18 hours behind enemy lines. By Air Force Para-Rescue Team Miguel. Stares at the screen, hands shaking now, not from age, but from recognition. From understanding what 18 hours behind enemy lines means, what it costs, what it takes to survive. He prints everything: service record, medal citations, mission reports. 23 pages of documented heroism that Mrs. Peterson declared impossible. But Miguel doesn't stop there, can't stop there, because this isn't just about one teacher's ignorance anymore. He searches deeper, finds the 404th Fighter Wing Reunion website, contact information for surviving squadron members, and then, like a gift from whatever gods watch over old soldiers, he finds it a phone number for Colonel Robert Hawk Sullivan, retired, Danny's grandfather's wingman. Still alive, still willing to talk about the men who didn't all make it home. That evening, Miguel sits in his small apartment, surrounded by the accumulated weight of a careful life, photographs of children he taught to fix things, certificates from night school, reminders that he built something good from the wreckage war left. Behind, he dials the number, heart pounding like it used to before dangerous missions. The voice that answers is weathered, familiar in its weariness. Colonel Sullivan. Miguel begins. This is Miguel Rodriguez. I'm calling about James Chen. The silence stretches. Long enough for Miguel to wonder if the line went dead. Jimmy Chen. The voice finally says, soft as prayer, best pilot I ever flew with, hell, best man I ever knew. You know what happened to him? Miguel explains carefully about Danny, about the school, about the cruel dismissal of a hero's service. Colonel Sullivan listens without interruption, the way military men do when briefings matter. When Miguel finishes, the silence returns, but different now, charged with purpose. That boy shouldn't have to carry this alone, Colonel Sullivan says. Jimmy saved my life twice, maybe 3 times, if you count the time he talked me out of not coming home. Miguel grips the phone tighter, feeling something shift in the universe, like the moment before an important battle. When you realize you're not fighting alone. What do you need from me? Colonel Sullivan asks. Miguel thinks about Danny walking those hallways, shoulders bent under the weight of disbelief, carrying his grandfather's helmet like a shield that couldn't quite protect him. I need you to make some calls. Miguel says, find the others, the ones who remember, the ones who can speak for the dead, because a boy needs to know his grandfather was a hero, and a school needs to learn the difference between skepticism and cruelty. Colonel Sullivan's laugh carries 40 years of accumulated wisdom. Son, he says, you just made an old pilot's day, consider it done. After Miguel hangs up, he sits in the gathering darkness, and for the first time in 3 days, allows himself to smile. Change is coming, justice is coming, and it's wearing the wings of men who understand the weight of keeping promises to the dead. Tomorrow, he'll return to his mop, his cleaning cart, his invisible presence in the school's machinery. But tonight, he's a soldier again, fighting for something that matters, for truth, for honor, for a boy who believed in heroes when the world tried to convince him they were all just lies. The battle isn't over, but it's no longer one-sided, and sometimes that's all. The advantage good men need to change the world. The announcement crackles over Lincoln Middle School's intercom, like radio static from a distant war zone, piercing the Monday morning calm attention students and faculty. This Thursday will hold our annual Veterans Day. Assembly students are encouraged to share family military histories, Mrs. Peterson looks up from her lesson plan, thin smile spreading across her face like oil on water. Danny, she says, voice carrying false sweetness. Perhaps you'd like to present your grandfather's story to the whole school. The classroom falls silent. 28. Pairs of eyes turning toward Danny like artillery, zeroing in on a target. Jake Morrison's grin widens, anticipating the show, the public execution of Danny's last shred of dignity. I don't think, Danny begins, but Mrs. Peterson cuts him off with raised hand. Authoritative final nonsense, she says. It's important for students to learn about historical accuracy versus family mythology. The words hit Danny like friendly fire, unexpected, devastating from someone supposed to protect him. You'll have 5 minutes, Mrs. Peterson continues to share what you believe about your grandfather's service, and then we'll discuss the importance of verification in historical claims. Danny's mouth goes dry, throat closing, like he's back in that cockpit. His grandfather never flew, according to Mrs. Peterson, plummeting toward Earth, no ejection seat, no parachute, no hope. That evening, Danny tells Grandma Lily about the assembly, about Mrs. Peterson's trap disguised as opportunity. His grandmother listens, hands folded, face unreadable as carved jade. Then she disappears into her bedroom, returns with a cardboard box sealed with yellowed tape that looks older than Danny's lifetime. Inside, beneath tissue paper, Danny finds treasures that make his breath catch. Flight logs. In his grandfather's careful handwriting, mission, dates, aircraft numbers, target coordinates, written in the measured script of someone who knew these records might be all that remained of dangerous days. Photographs, black and white group shots of young men in flight suits standing before F-4 Phantoms, their names written on the back in fading ink, and letters, dozens of them, from something called the 404th Tactical Fighter Wing. Commendations, condolences, correspondence between his grandfather and men, with names like Hawk, Sullivan and Spider, Martinez and Ghost, Thompson. Real names, real faces, real proof. You take these, Grandma Lily says, voice steady as runway. Light show them what truth looks like. Thursday arrives like an execution date, grey November sky pressing down on the school building with the weight of approaching storms. The gymnasium fills, students shuffling in, teachers taking positions along the walls like guards. Mrs. Peterson stands at the podium, microphone feedback, shrieking briefly before settling into electronic calm. Today we honor our nation's veterans, she begins, but we also learn the importance of distinguishing fact from fiction in family narratives. Her eyes find Danny seated in the front row, cardboard box, heavy on his lap, containing the weight of documented truth. Several students share sanitized stories, great uncles who served cousins in the National Guard, safe presentations about uncontroversial service. Then Mrs. Peterson calls his name. Danny Chen, please share your family's military story. Danny stands, legs unsteady, box clutched against his chest, and walks toward the microphone, feeling like a condemned man approaching gallows. The gymnasium stretches before him, hundreds of faces waiting for entertainment, for the spectacle of public failure. My grandfather, Danny begins, voice barely audible, was Lieutenant Colonel James Chen, 404th Tactical Fighter Wing, Vietnam. Behind him, Mrs. Peterson's expression shifts to satisfaction, anticipating the moment she can demonstrate to the entire school the importance of her lesson. Danny opens the box, removes the flight logs, holds them up with trembling hands. He flew 147 combat missions. Shot down October 15th, 1969, rescued after 18 hours behind enemy lines. His voice grows stronger as he reads from official documents, mission reports, medal citations, the accumulated weight of bureaucratic proof. The gymnasium grows quieter. Students leaning forward, teachers exchanging glances. Mrs. Peterson's satisfied expression beginning to crack like ice under pressure. Danny holds up photographs, squadron shots, his grandfather young and proud, surrounded by men who flew into hell and sometimes didn't come back. And then, from the back of the gymnasium comes the sound that changes everything, the unmistakable whine of rotor blades, approaching fast, growing louder until the windows rattle and conversations stop mid-sentence. Through the glass doors, Danny sees it descending from grey sky, like mechanical thunder, a helicopter, military green precision, landing on the school's football field. The gymnasium explodes into chaos. Students pressing against windows, teachers shouting for order, Mrs. Peterson demanding everyone return to their seats. But no one listens, because emerging from the helicopter, walking across autumn grass with the confident stride of someone accustomed to making entrances, is Sylvester Stallone. Not the character. Not Rambo, not Rocky. But the man himself, wearing dress uniform of some kind, medals catching November light purpose, written across his face like a mission briefing. He approaches the school flanked by men in military-bearing older gentlemen with silver hair and bearing that speaks of dangerous years survived. The gymnasium falls into stunned silence, broken only by whispered recognition. "Is that... It can't be... Holy..." Mrs. Peterson stands, frozen, microphone forgotten, authority evaporating like fuel from a damaged tank, and Danny, still holding his grandfather's photographs, watches through the window as justice approaches, wearing the face of someone who understands what it means to fight for the forgotten. The helicopter blades slow to stillness, but the air continues to vibrate with possibility, with change, with the approaching storm of accountability. What would you do if the cavalry arrived when you needed? In the most, the gymnasium doors burst open like breaching charges. Explosive, decisive final. Sylvester Stallone enters first. Not the Hollywood star, but something more dangerous, more real, a man carrying the weight of every veteran story ever dismissed, ever doubted, ever forgotten. Behind him walk 4 men, silver-haired, straight-backed, wearing the bearing of those who flew through fire and lived to remember the ones who didn't. The tallest steps forward, voice cutting through the stunned silence. Like a blade through silk, I'm Colonel Robert Sullivan, United States Air Force retired. Mrs. Peterson's face drains of color, of certainty, of the smugness that carried her through 3 days of institutional cruelty. Danny recognizes the voice, even though he's never heard it. Something in the cadence, the authority, the weight of command, speaks directly to his grandfather's memory. "We're here," Colonel Sullivan continues, voice carrying to every corner of the gymnasium, "for Lieutenant Colonel James Chen, 404th Tactical Fighter Wing, and for his grandson who shouldn't have to defend a hero's honor alone." Stallone steps to the microphone, displaces Mrs. Peterson without ceremony, without apology, his presence filling the space she occupied with something larger, more substantial, more true. "My name is Sylvester Stallone," he says, and his voice carries the gravitas of someone who spent decades portraying warriors, but never forgot the difference between performance and reality. "I've made my career playing soldiers, but these men," he gestures toward the veterans behind him, "these men were soldiers, real heroes, real Americans who flew into hell so the rest of us could live in peace." The gymnasium holds its breath, 600 people suspended between what they thought they knew and what they're learning is true. Miguel Rodriguez emerges from the crowd, pushing his cleaning cart like a chariot, like a weapon, like vindication on wheels. From the cart, he produces a folder thick with documents, photographs, correspondence, the accumulated weight of bureaucratic proof. "I've been doing research," Miguel says, voice steady, carrying the authority of someone who's fought his own wars, survived his own hells, about Lieutenant Colonel Chen. about his service, about his sacrifice. He hands the folder to Stallone, who opens it with reverence, scanning pages that document heroism in triplicate. Colonel Sullivan steps forward, addresses the assembly, but his eyes find Danny, hold him steady, anchor him to truth. Jimmy Chen saved my life. October 15th, 1969. He says, voice carrying across decades, across the weight of survivors' guilt, across the responsibility of bearing witness. We were flying close air support near the DMZ when my bird took ground fire. Hydraulics failed, controls gone spinning toward the jungle like a leaf in a hurricane. Jimmy broke formation. Standard procedure says, don't risk 2 aircraft for 1 crew. But Jimmy Chen never flew by standard procedure. He followed me down through AAA, fire, surface-to-air missiles, everything the North Vietnamese could throw at 2 American F-4s. My ejection seat malfunctioned, parachute tangled landing. Hard behind enemy lines, broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, and the sound of helicopters, definitely not friendly. For 18 hours, Jimmy circled overhead, coordinating rescue efforts, calling in airstrikes to keep the NVA away from my position. He should have returned to base when his fuel ran low, should have let someone else take the mission. But he stayed, and when rescue finally came, it was Jimmy's voice on the radio guiding them in through the darkness. Stallone's voice takes over, reading from the folder, official citations that transform bureaucratic language into poetry. Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight. 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received in action against hostile forces, Air Medal. With oak leaf clusters for sustained aerial achievement during combat operations. The words echo through the gymnasium. Each citation a nail in the coffin of Mrs. Peterson's certainty, each award proof positive that heroes exist even when small minds refuse to see them, but it's the final document that stops everyone. Colder letter handwritten on White House stationery, dated 3 months ago. Danny Chen's application for posthumous recognition of his grandfather's service has been approved. President Biden will present the Congressional Medal of Honor to Lieutenant Colonel James Chen, Vietnam, war hero whose courage under fire exemplifies the finest traditions of American military service. The letter continues, but Stallone's voice catches slightly as he reads the final lines. Mr. Chen, your grandfather's sacrifice will be honored at a ceremony this Veterans Day at Arlington National Cemetery. We regret only that recognition took so long to reach a man who deserved our nation's highest honor 40 years ago. The gymnasium erupts, not in mockery now, but in something else, something that sounds like respect, like recognition, like the delayed but inevitable arrival of justice. Mrs. Peterson stands frozen, microphone forgotten, authority evaporated, watching her certainty dissolve like sugar in acid rain. And Danny, clutching his grandfather's flight helmet, feels something shift inside his chest. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of something that might become healing, given time. Stallone's hand settles on Danny's shoulder, warm, steady, real. Your grandfather, he says quietly. But the microphone carries his words to every corner of the silent gymnasium, was everything. You said he was everything you believed, everything you knew in your heart to be true. Sometimes the world takes time to catch up to what kids already know. Heroes are real, honor matters, and truth always finds a way to fly. The helicopter lifts. Off-rotor wash scattering autumn leaves across the football field, like confetti, celebrating delayed justice. But Stallone remains walking through Lincoln Middle School's hallways, with Danny beside him. The boy's steps lighter now, no longer carrying the weight of defending truth alone. Principal Martinez emerges from his office, face flushed, tie askew, looking like a man who's just realized his ship has been taking on water for days while he slept at the wheel. Mr. Stallone, he stammers, extending a trembling hand. I had no idea about Mrs. Peterson's classroom management or her teaching methods. Stallone's handshake is firm, brief. The grip of someone who measures character in moments like this, Principal Martinez. He says, voice carrying the weight of disappointed authority. Your teacher spent 3 days humiliating a child for honoring his grandfather. That's not classroom management, that's institutional bullying. The words hang in the air like smoke from a precision strike, accurate, devastating final behind them misses. Peterson approaches her confident stride, replaced by something that looks like a retreat under fire. Mr. Stallone. She begins, voice pitched to regain control. I was simply teaching critical thinking skills, helping students distinguish between family, stories and... Stallone turns toward her and the look in his eyes stops her mid-sentence. Not anger exactly, but something colder, more final. The gaze of someone who's spent decades studying what courage looks like and recognizing its absence. Mom. He says quietly, you weren't teaching critical thinking. You were teaching cruelty. There's a difference. The hallway falls silent. Students pressed against lockers, teachers emerging from classrooms, maintenance staff pausing in their work to witness. This moment when accountability arrives, wearing an unexpected face. Colonel Sullivan appears beside Stallone, carrying a wooden case polished to mirror brightness, brass nameplate gleaming under fluorescent lights. Danny, he says, voice, gentle as landing. Instructions for damaged aircraft. This belongs in a place where people will see it, where they'll remember what your grandfather gave. He opens the case, revealing Lieutenant Colonel Chen's distinguished flying cross mounted on blue velvet beside. His Purple Heart's Air Medal, Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, each decoration catching light like stars in a night sky, mapping constellations of courage. The school should have a proper display. Colonel Sullivan continues, something permanent, something that honors not just your grandfather but all the veterans whose children walk these halls. Principal Martinez nods, eagerly seizing the opportunity to transform from part of the problem into part of the solution. Yes, absolutely, we'll install it in the main hallway where everyone can see, a permanent memorial. But Danny speaks up, voice small but steady, finding strength in this moment of institutional recognition. Could it go in Mrs. Peterson's classroom? The request surprises everyone, including Mrs. Peterson, whose face cycles through confusion, fear, something that might be the beginning of understanding. She taught me something important. Danny continues, looking directly at her, not with anger, but with the kind of measured forgiveness that comes from having justice finally arrive. She taught me that some people need proof before they believe in heroes. So maybe if the medals are there where she can see them every day, she'll remember that heroes are real, even when they're hard to recognize. Mrs. Peterson's eyes fill with what might be tears, or might be the delayed recognition of how badly she's failed, not just Danny, but every student who ever needed an adult to believe in their truth. The display case arrives 3 days later, mahogany and brass installed with ceremony beside the chalkboard where Mrs. Peterson will see it every morning, every lesson, every moment she spends teaching children about the difference between skepticism and cynicism, between critical thinking and casual cruelty. The local newspaper runs a front-page story, Hollywood. Star honors local Vietnam hero, with photographs of Danny holding his grandfather's helmet beside the memorial case. The story spreads beyond Lincoln Middle School, beyond their small town, becoming something larger about the children of forgotten wars and the adults who either help them carry their inheritance of honor or teach them to be ashamed of what they should be proud to claim. Jake Morrison, confronted with undeniable proof of his own cruelty, stops making jokes about fake heroes, starts asking questions about his own grandfather who fought in Korea and never talked about it. Other students bring their own family stories, photographs of uncles, aunts, grandparents who served in places with names like Normandy, Iwo Jima, Baghdad, Kandahar. Mrs. Peterson's classroom transforms into something resembling a shrine to the complicated truth that heroism comes in many forms, most of them unrecognized, until someone like a 13-year-old boy refuses to let them disappear. The medal display catches morning light every day, casting small rainbows across the classroom walls, reminding everyone present that some truths shine brightest when they're finally allowed to emerge from shadow. And Danny, no longer the boy who walked alone through hallways. Of mockery becomes something else, something stronger. A keeper of stories, a defender of truth, a living reminder that heroes often looked like grandfathers who flew through hell and came home to raise families in peace. The transformation is quiet, gradual, like healing, like growth, like the slow recognition that justice doesn't always arrive with trumpets, but sometimes with helicopters and movie stars and old soldiers who refuse to let their brothers be forgotten. 3 months later, spring arrives at Lincoln Middle School like a gentle invasion, softening edges. That winter-made harsh Danny walks the same hallways, but everything has changed. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the quiet shift that comes when truth settles into its proper place. The medal display case has become a pilgrimage site. Students pausing between classes to read the inscriptions, touch the glass, whisper questions about courage, about war, about the grandfathers and grandmothers they never thought to ask about. Mrs. Peterson's classroom transformed into something resembling a sanctuary where family stories are received with reverence instead of skepticism, where children learn the difference between healthy questioning and cruel dismissal. She approaches Danny after class one April morning when the room empties, leaving them alone with the weight of everything that's passed between them. "Danny," she says, voice carrying an unfamiliar quality, something that might be humility. "I owe you an apology, not just for doubting your grandfather's service, but for teaching you and every student in this room that skepticism is more valuable than belief." The words come slowly, like someone learning a foreign language. The vocabulary of acknowledgement, admission, regret. "Your grandfather was a hero," she continues. "But more than that, you were a hero in defending his memory when I made it your burden to bear." Alone, Danny nods, accepting her words without triumph, without vindication, with the quiet grace of someone who's learned that victory sometimes looks like understanding. Jake Morrison, once the architect of Danny's humiliation, now sits at lunch, asking questions about the 404th Fighter Wing, about F-4 Phantoms, about what it takes to fly into danger when every instinct screams retreat. He's writing a report for history class about his own grandfather who served in Korea, who came home with nightmares he never discussed until Jake finally asked the right questions with the right respect. The transformation spreads beyond classroom walls into homes, where children interrogate family photo albums with new urgency-seeking stories that might have been dismissed as exaggeration, but now demand closer examination. Sarah Williams discovers her great-aunt flew transport planes in World War II, part of the Women Air Force service pilots whose contributions were classified for decades. Marcus Rodriguez learns his uncle earned a Silver Star in Vietnam, but never mentioned it because he came home to a country that called him baby killer instead of hero. The stories multiply like seeds in fertile ground, each one adding weight to the growing understanding that heroism isn't always easy to recognize, especially when it's carried quietly by people who look like neighbors. Teachers, janitors, grandparents, Mr. Rodriguez, no longer invisible, accepts an invitation to speak at the spring assembly about his own service, his own Purple Heart, his own decision to build something good from the wreckage war left behind. He stands at the podium where Mrs. Peterson once demolished Danny's truth and speaks about the young men who didn't make it home, about survivors' guilt, about the weight of carrying stories for the dead. But mostly, he speaks about Danny, about the courage it takes for a child to stand alone. against institutional doubt, to defend truth when adults choose comfortable lies. Veterans Day arrives again 1 year later. But this time, the assembly feels different, feels sacred, feels like what it should have been all along. The question hangs in the gymnasium air, not as challenge, but as invitation to look closer, listen harder, ask better questions of the people who raised us, who fought for us, who came home, changed, and carried that change quietly, gracefully, heroically as. The assembly ends, students file out slowly, many stopping to shake Danny's hand, to ask questions about research, about finding truth, about honoring memory. And in the back, near the exit doors, Stallone appears again, not announced this time, not arriving. By helicopter, just a man keeping a promise to check on a young person who needed defending. He nods to Danny across the departing crowd, a warrior's salute to another warrior, acknowledging the battle fought, the victory, won, the honor preserved. Danny nods back, understanding something fundamental about the weight adults carry about the stories that shape us, about the difference between being a victim of cruelty and a guardian of truth. Spring continues its gentle invasion, softening what was harsh, growing what was dormant, transforming what seemed permanent into something more beautiful, more true, more worthy of the sacrifice it honors. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe.